The fire had burned down to embers by the time my grandson asked the question. I'd been expecting it, truth be told. Jesse was 18 now, old enough to hear hard stories. Old enough to understand that some silences cost more than we can afford to pay. "Grandpa," he said, poking at the coals with a stick, "who was the mountain's daughter everyone talks about?" I looked at him across the dying light. Snow was falling outside my cabin the way it had been falling that night 22 years ago when everything changed. Jesse had his mother's eyes, curious and clear, not yet clouded by the kind of regrets that wake you at 3 in the morning. "That's a long story," I told him. "I've got time." I didn't. That's the thing about being 74 with a cough that won't quit. Time runs out whether you're ready or not. And there were things Jesse needed to know before I went. Things about speaking up when it matters, about the cost of looking away. "All right then," I said, settling back in my chair. "But you need to understand something first. This isn't just her story, it's mine too, and not in any way that makes me proud." Jesse waited, patient like his grandmother taught him. "They still talk about her in these parts," I began. "The mountain's daughter, they call her now, though she wasn't born to the mountain. She was born to the valley, to a good man and a gentle woman, in a house that should have been full of love." I paused, choosing my words careful. "But the mountain claimed her anyway, the way the mountain claims everything that belongs to it, the way it claimed me 40 years past, when I first rode these trails with a young man's legs and an old man's understanding that some places change you down to the bone." The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, the same wind that had blown through Coal Ridge in November of 1881. "This is her story," I said quietly, "and his, and maybe a little bit mine, though I was just the man who brought supplies up the high trail and kept my mouth shut when I should have spoken. We all have our regrets, but some stories need telling, even if they show us where we failed." Jesse leaned forward, his young face serious in the firelight. "It starts," I told him, "like most mountain stories do, with something breaking." The porcelain bowl was the color of a winter sky just before snow, pale blue with tiny painted flowers brought all the way from Boston when Mara's mother was still alive. It was one of the few beautiful things left in the Hartwell house, and Mara knew better than to handle it carelessly. But her hands were cold that morning. November had come hard to Coal Ridge, bringing frost that crept across windows and made the floorboards contract with sharp cracks in the night. Mara had been up since before dawn, the way she had been every day for 3 years, since her father married Vivian Fletcher and brought her into their home like a blessing. In town, people still talked about how lucky Elias Hartwell was, a widower with a young daughter struggling to run a freight business and keep house. Then along came Vivian, refined and beautiful, willing to settle in a rough town at the edge of the mountains. She wore silk dresses to church, kept her blonde hair perfectly pinned, spoke in a voice like honey over warm bread. Behind the closed doors of the Hartwell house, Vivian Fletcher was something else entirely. Mara heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Her stomach tightened the way it always did now. She scrubbed faster at the breakfast dishes, trying to finish before Vivian came down. The bowl sat on the drying board, and she reached for it with hands that trembled slightly. The bowl slipped. It happened so fast. One moment it was in her hands, the next it was tumbling toward the floor. Mara's desperate grab only sent it spinning faster. The sound of it shattering against the wooden planks was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. Mara dropped to her knees immediately, gathering the pieces with shaking fingers. Maybe she could fix it. Maybe if she was careful, if she used hide glue, if she... "What have you done?" Vivian's voice was still honey-sweet. But there was something underneath it now, something cold and sharp as January ice. Mara looked up to find her stepmother standing in the doorway, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, blue eyes taking in the scene with an expression that made Mara's chest constrict. "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "It slipped. I didn't what?" Vivian moved closer, her skirts rustling. Didn't mean to destroy one of the few valuable things in this house. Didn't mean to prove once again that you're as clumsy and worthless as I've always said. I'll fix it. I can glue—" The slap came without warning, sharp enough to snap Mara's head to the side. Her cheek blazed with heat, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. "You'll do no such thing," Vivian said. Her voice never rose above that terrible sweetness. "That bowl was worth more than you'll ever be. Do you understand me?" Mara stayed on her knees, one hand pressed to her burning cheek, porcelain shards cutting into her other palm. She'd learned not to argue. Arguments only made it worse. "Stand up." Mara stood carefully, trying not to step on the broken pieces. Vivian circled her slowly, the way a hawk circles something small and wounded. "Look at you. 16 years old and still worthless. Can't keep a simple bowl from breaking. Can't keep your hair neat. Can't walk through a room without knocking something over." Vivian's hand shot out and grabbed Mara's braid, yanking her head back. "Can't even stand up straight without slouching like some common field hand." Mara bit her lip to keep from crying out. Tears would make it worse. Crying always made it worse. What neither of them knew was that someone was watching. Through the frost-edged kitchen window, Cole Wilder stood on the side street. He'd been walking past on his way to the trading post. He never interfered in town business. Kept to himself up in the high country, came down maybe 3 or 4 times a year for supplies. Most folks in Coal Ridge knew his name, but little else. He stood there now, perfectly still, his gray eyes fixed on the scene playing out in that warm kitchen, on the woman with the honey voice and the cruel hands, on the girl who'd learned to make herself small. Cole Wilder had seen this before, in another kitchen, in another town, a lifetime ago. He'd walked away then, not this time. I was loading supplies into my wagon when I saw him, Cole Wilder, standing in the middle of the side street like he'd taken root there, just staring at the Hartwell house with an expression I couldn't read. I'd known Cole for maybe 10 years by then, delivered goods up to his cabin when the trails were passable. He was a man who kept his own counsel, paid in cash or furs, and never wasted words. Seeing him standing there, frozen like that, made something cold settle in my gut. Because I knew what window he was looking through. I'd walked past that same window 100 times. Heard things I told myself weren't my business. Seen a young girl with bruises she explained away as accidents. I'd promised her mother I'd watch over her. Made that promise 5 years back when Sarah Hartwell was dying of the fever. Held her hand and swore I'd look after little Mara. Then I'd done nothing but deliver supplies and keep my mouth shut. Cole turned and saw me watching. For a moment, our eyes met. 2 men who'd both seen something they shouldn't have ignored. Then he walked toward the Hartwell house and knocked on the door. I should have felt relief. Should have been grateful someone was finally doing something. Instead, I just felt shame. Mara answered the door with her cheek still red and swelling. Her hands were cut from gathering the porcelain pieces. She kept one hand behind her back, as if hiding the damage could make it less real. Cole Wilder stood on the porch, well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who lived hard lives in unforgiving country. His dark hair touched his collar. Several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. He wore buckskin and fur, and he smelled like pine smoke and winter air. His eyes, pale gray like storm clouds, fixed on her face. "Mr. Wilder," Mara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I help you?" His gaze moved from her face to her hands, to the blood welling up from cuts she hadn't noticed. Then he looked past her into the house, and something changed in his expression. "I heard," he said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse, each word deliberate. "Through the window. I was walking past and I heard." Mara's heart stopped. The kitchen window faced the side street. If he'd been passing by, if he'd heard— "I don't know what you mean," she said quickly, but her hand moved instinctively to her burning cheek. "Yes, you do." Cole's gray eyes held hers, and I saw enough to know it wasn't the first time. "Mara?" Vivian's voice called from inside, sharp now despite its sweetness. "Who is it?" Cole didn't move from the doorway. "I'd like to speak with Mrs. Hartwell," he said, loud enough to carry. Mara heard her stepmother's footsteps. A moment later, Vivian appeared in the hallway behind her. The change was instantaneous. The hard edges smoothed away, replaced by the gracious lady of the house. "Mr. Wilder," Vivian said warmly, moving past Mara to stand in the doorway. "What an unexpected pleasure. We don't often see you in town. How can we help you?" Cole's expression didn't change. "I'd like to speak with you, ma'am, about the girl." Something flickered in Vivian's eyes, but her smile never wavered. "Mara? Is there a problem?" "That depends on your definition of problem," Cole said. The words were quiet, but there was steel underneath them. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Hartwell, one that might benefit everyone involved." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained pleasant. "How intriguing. Please come in. Mara, fetch some coffee for our guest." Mara moved toward the kitchen automatically. Years of obedience making her feet move even as her mind raced. What had Cole Wilder heard? What had he seen? And why, after years of keeping himself separate from town business, was he here now? She prepared the coffee with shaking hands, listening to the murmur of voices from the parlor. When she brought the tray in, Vivian was seated in her best chair, posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. Cole had refused a seat and stood near the window, his bulk making the tidy parlor seem suddenly small. "Thank you, Mara," Vivian said sweetly. "You may go finish your chores now." "Actually," Cole said, "I'd like her to stay. This concerns her." Vivian's smile tightened, but she gestured graciously. "Of course, Mara, sit." Mara perched on the edge of a wooden chair, her hands clenched in her apron. Cole was watching her again with that unreadable expression. "Mrs. Hartwell," Cole began, turning his attention to Vivian, "I'll be direct. I live alone up in the high country. It's hard living. And there are things, cooking, mending, keeping house, that I'm not good at. I need help." Vivian's eyebrows rose delicately. "I see. And you're looking for a housekeeper?" "Not exactly." Cole's gray eyes remained steady. "I'm looking to take the girl, permanently." The silence that followed was absolute. Mara's mind went blank. Vivian sat perfectly still. But something was working behind her eyes, something calculating and quick. "Take her," Vivian repeated slowly. "You mean adopt her as a ward?" "Call it what you want," Cole said. "I'll provide for her, teach her mountain skills, give her a roof and food and safety. In return, she helps with the work that needs doing. When she's old enough, if she wants to leave, she can. Until then, she stays with me." Vivian's fingers tapped once against the arm of her chair, the only sign of the thoughts racing through her mind. Mara watched her stepmother's face, saw the exact moment when the idea took root. This was an opportunity, a way to be rid of Mara without scandal, without questions, a respectable arrangement with a known if solitary man. "Mr. Wilder," Vivian said carefully, "this is quite sudden. Mara is my stepdaughter, and while she has her challenges, I've done my best to raise her properly, taking her to live in the wilderness, away from civilization and proper society." "Ma'am," Cole interrupted, his voice still quiet, but with an edge now. "I don't think proper society has done much for her." Vivian's eyes flashed, but her smile remained. "You've made your proposition clear, Mr. Wilder. However, Mara's father is her guardian, not I. Any such arrangement would require his consent. When's he due back?" "Tomorrow evening." Cole nodded slowly. "Then I'll return tomorrow evening." He moved toward the door, then paused, looked back at Mara. "And Mrs. Hartwell? Until then, I'd consider it a personal favor if the girl remained unharmed." The words hung in the air like smoke. Vivian rose smoothly, her gracious mask firmly in place. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mr. Wilder. Mara is perfectly safe here." Cole's gray eyes moved from Vivian to Mara's reddened cheek, to her cut hands, to the way she sat hunched and small in the chair. He didn't say anything else. He simply turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. From my wagon outside, I watched Cole Wilder leave the Hartwell house, watched him walk down the street toward the trading post, his stride purposeful and sure. I should have gone in then, should have checked on Mara, made sure Vivian didn't take out her anger on the girl, but I didn't. I just finished loading my supplies and drove away, kept my mouth shut, kept my head down, kept failing the promise I'd made to a dying woman. That's what I was good at back then, staying silent. Cole Wilder didn't leave town that day. He took a room at the boarding house and waited. 24 hours until Elias Hartwell would return from his freight run. 24 hours to make sure he didn't lose his nerve. He sat in the saloon that evening, nursing a single whiskey, not drinking it, just holding the glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight, thinking about another girl in another kitchen a lifetime ago. Her name had been Sarah Crane, his sister. I need to tell you about Sarah because without her, none of this makes sense. Without Sarah, Cole Wilder never would have knocked on that door, never would have interfered, would have walked past that window the same way I did 100 times before. Sarah was 3 years younger than Cole. Their ma died when they were kids, and their pa remarried quick. The new wife was pretty, said all the right things. Everyone in town thought Joseph Crane was lucky to find such a refined woman willing to settle down with a widower and his 2 half-grown children. Behind closed doors, she was someone else. Cole was 17 when it started. Already tall, already strong, already working the trap lines with his father. He didn't notice at first, didn't see the way Sarah started making herself smaller, started apologizing for everything, started wearing long sleeves even in summer. By the time he figured it out, the damage was done. Sarah didn't believe him when he said it wasn't her fault. Thought she deserved it somehow, that she was clumsy, difficult, worthless. All the things the stepmother told her. She married the first man who asked, just to get away from that house. Tommy Fletcher, a miner with a temper and hard fists. Turned out he was worse than the stepmother ever was. Sarah died when she was 24. Fell down the stairs, they said. Or he pushed her. Didn't matter which. She was just as dead either way. Cole carried that for 15 years. The guilt of not seeing, not acting, not saving the one person who depended on him. But there was more to it than just Sarah. 2 years after Sarah died, Cole was working as a scout for the Army, stationed at a fort in Wyoming Territory. One night, walking back to the barracks, he passed by the married officers' quarters, heard a woman crying, heard the sound of fists on flesh. He stood outside that door for 5 minutes, knowing what was happening inside, knowing he should do something. He walked away, told himself it wasn't his business, that the woman was married to an officer, that interfering would cost him his position, that he didn't have proof, didn't know the full story. Next morning, they found her dead. Captain's wife, beaten so bad they could barely recognize her face. Cole left the Army after that, couldn't wear the uniform anymore, couldn't look at himself in the mirror. He came to these mountains to disappear, to live alone, to never be in a position to fail anyone again. And then, 15 years later, he walked past a kitchen window in Coal Ridge, saw a woman hitting a girl, heard that honey-sweet voice spitting poison, saw Sarah all over again. I saw Cole that night in the saloon, sat down at his table without asking. He didn't tell me to leave, so I stayed. "You really going through with it?" I asked. "Yes." "Vivian's not going to take it well. Neither will some folks in town. Don't much care what folks think." I looked at him across the scarred table, at the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, a man who'd lived hard and carried heavy things. "Why now?" I asked. "Why her?" Cole was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I had a sister once, Sarah. She died the way that girl in the Hartwell house is dying. Slow, from the inside out, until there's nothing left but a ghost in a body that's still breathing." He looked at me then, really looked at me. I didn't save Sarah, didn't even try hard enough, and I've been paying for that every day since." He paused. "I can't bring my sister back, but maybe I can keep another man's daughter from disappearing the same way." "What if you're too late?" I asked. "What if she's already gone?" Then at least I tried. We sat in silence after that. Two men thinking about the people we'd failed, the promises we'd broken, the difference between what we could have done and what we did. Finally, I said what I'd been thinking since I saw him at that window. I knew her mother, Mara's mother, Sarah Hartwell. She asked me to watch over the girl if anything happened to her. I looked down at my hands. I've been delivering to that house for 3 years. I've seen the bruises, heard the sounds, and I told myself it wasn't my business. Cole didn't say anything, didn't need to. We both knew what I was confessing. "If you take her," I said quietly, "I'll help. Supplies, information, whatever you need. It's the least I can do." "The least you can do," Cole said, "is tell the truth if anyone asks. Don't let them paint her as a victim who needs rescuing from me. She's already a victim. I'm just offering her a way out." "And if her father says no?" Cole's gray eyes were hard as winter stone. "Then I'll have to decide how much I'm willing to risk to do the right thing." The wagon rolled into Cole Ridge just as the sun was setting, painting the rough wooden storefronts in shades of orange and gold. Elias Hartwell was bone-tired from 2 weeks on the mountain roads, his shoulders aching from handling the team through early snow and treacherous passes. But the sight of home, lamplight glowing in the windows of his house, made him sit straighter on the bench. He'd brought good money this time. The mining camps were paying premium rates for winter supplies. Vivian would be pleased. She'd been talking about new curtains for the parlor, maybe a proper china set. As he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, the door opened. Vivian appeared, silhouetted against the warm interior light. She looked beautiful, as always, her dress crisp despite the late hour, her hair perfectly arranged. "Elias," she called warmly. "Thank heavens you're home safe. I was beginning to worry." He climbed down stiffly, his joints protesting. Vivian met him at the steps, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. Her hands were soft when they touched his arm, so different from the rough calluses he'd developed over years of handling reins and freight. "Good run?" she asked, guiding him inside. "Better than good." He followed her into the warmth, already loosening his coat. "The camps are desperate for supplies before the snow really hits. I cleared nearly double what I expected." "How wonderful." Vivian helped him out of his coat. "You must be exhausted. Sit, and I'll bring you something to eat." It wasn't until he settled into his chair in the parlor that Elias noticed the quiet. "Where's Mara?" "Upstairs," Vivian said smoothly. "She's been a bit under the weather today. Nothing serious, just a headache. I thought it best she rest." Elias frowned. Mara was never sick. The girl was sturdy as a young pine. "Should I check on her?" "After you eat," Vivian said firmly. "You need to keep your strength up. Besides, there's something we need to discuss first, something important." The way she said it made Elias's stomach tighten. He'd been married to Vivian long enough to recognize that tone, the one she used when she'd been planning something. She brought him stew and fresh bread, and while he ate, she told him about Cole Wilder's visit. Elias listened, his spoon growing still in his hand. "He wants to take Mara? To the mountains?" That's what he said. Vivian settled into her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. "At first I was shocked, appalled really, but the more I've thought about it, Elias, the more I think it might be exactly what Mara needs." "What she needs?" Elias set down his bowl. "Vivian, she's 16 years old. Cole Wilder is a grown man, a stranger, living alone up in—" "He's offering her a future," Vivian interrupted gently. "Think about it, Elias. What does Mara have here? She's not suited for town life. She's clumsy, awkward around people. She can't seem to learn the skills she'd need to make a good match. She's young yet. She's 16 and she still can't manage the simplest tasks without breaking things or making a mess." Vivian's voice was patient, reasonable. "You know I've tried, Elias. I've done everything I can to teach her, but some girls just aren't meant for that life." Elias looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of freight work. Maybe he hadn't noticed how much Mara was struggling. He'd been gone so much these past 3 years, building up the business, trying to provide the life Vivian deserved. The mountain life would suit her, Vivian continued. Hard work, simple living, simple. And Cole Wilder, for all his rough ways, is known to be honest. He'd teach her practical skills, things she could actually learn. I don't know, Elias said slowly, taking her away from the only home she's known. Is it really home if she's miserable here? Vivian leaned forward, her blue eyes earnest. Elias, I know you don't see it. You're away so much. And when you're here, Mara puts on a brave face. But she's unhappy. She feels trapped. She needs something different. Elias felt something crack in his chest. His daughter, who looked so much like her mother that sometimes it hurt to see her, was unhappy here. When is Wilder coming back? Tonight, Vivian said. He said he'd return this evening to hear your answer. Elias rubbed his face, exhaustion making his thoughts slow and muddy. I need to talk to Mara first. Of course. Vivian rose gracefully. I'll fetch her. But Elias, try to really listen to what she says. Not just the words, but what's underneath them. Footsteps on the stairs announced Mara's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, and Elias felt his heart twist. She looked so small, so pale in the lamplight. Her hair was braided but messy, strands escaping around her face, and her cheek. What happened to your face? He was on his feet before he'd fully registered the mark. Reddish, fading now, but the shape was wrong. Not like something you'd get from a straight edge. Mara's hand flew up instinctively to cover it. I walked into a cabinet door yesterday. In the kitchen. It was stupid. Let me see. She dropped her hand reluctantly. Elias studied the mark. It was fading, more of a shadow than a bruise, but the shape. Mara, he said quietly. Vivian told me about Cole Wilder's offer. Something flickered across his daughter's face. Fear, maybe, or hope. He couldn't tell. What do you think about it? He asked. Mara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. What do you want me to say? The truth? Do you want to go with him? I don't know him. I don't know anything about mountain living, or... She stopped, swallowed hard. But I don't want to keep being a disappointment here. The words hit Elias like a physical blow. You're not a disappointment. Aren't I? Mara's eyes met his, and he saw something ancient and tired in them, something no 16-year-old should carry. I can't do anything right. I break things. I'm clumsy. I can't learn the way Vivian tries to teach me. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'd be better somewhere else. Before Elias could respond, there was a knock at the door. Vivian's voice drifted in from the hallway. That will be Mr. Wilder. Shall I show him in? Elias wanted to say no, wanted to send the mountain man away, keep his daughter here where he could protect her. But protect her from what? From a life she clearly wasn't thriving in? Yes, he heard himself say. Show him in. Cole Wilder filled the doorway to the parlor, bringing with him the smell of pine and leather and cold night air. His gray eyes went immediately to Mara, scanning her face with an intensity that made Elias straighten defensively. Mr. Hartwell, Cole said. Good to see you back safe. Wilder, Elias gestured to a chair, but Cole remained standing. My wife tells me you made an unusual proposal. I did, and I'm still making it. Why? The question came out harsher than Elias intended. You don't know us, don't know her. Why would you take on the burden of a half-grown girl? Because she needs out, Cole said bluntly, and because I could use the help. It's a fair trade. Fair trade? Elias felt anger starting to build. My daughter isn't livestock to be... No, Cole agreed. She's a person being hurt. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Vivian made a small sound of protest, but Cole's eyes remained on Elias. Excuse me, Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. I heard it, Cole said. Yesterday morning. I was walking past and I heard everything that happened in your kitchen. The bowl breaking. The things that were said after. Mara had gone white as snow. Vivian's expression was perfectly composed, but her hands had tightened on the arms of her chair. "That's quite an accusation," Vivian said, her voice still honey-sweet. "Based on what? Sounds through a window? Based on seeing a grown woman slap a child hard enough to leave a mark that's still visible a day later," Cole said flatly. "Based on hearing words meant to tear down and destroy." "Elias," Vivian said, rising to her feet. "This man is clearly disturbed. He's making wild allegations." "Is he?" Elias turned to his daughter. "Mara, look at me." Mara raised her eyes, and Elias felt his world tilt. There was something there, something desperate and terrified and pleading all at once. "Did she hit you?" he asked. The silence stretched. Mara's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted to Vivian, then back to her father. "It was discipline," Vivian said quickly. "Sometimes children need correction, Elias. You know that. Mara can be willful. I asked Mara." Elias's voice was harder now. "Mara, did she hit you?" A tear slipped down Mara's cheek. She nodded once, quick and small. The anger that surged through Elias was white-hot and absolute. "You struck my daughter." "I disciplined a child who destroyed valuable property," Vivian said, her voice losing some of its sweetness. "There's a difference. Show me your arms, Mara." Mara shook her head mutely, her hands clutching her sleeves. "Show me." With trembling fingers, Mara pushed up her left sleeve. The bruises were old, fading to yellow and green, but unmistakable. Finger marks on her upper arm, more marks on her wrist where she'd been grabbed and held. Elias felt something inside him shatter. "How long?" His voice broke. "How long has this been happening? Papa, I didn't want you to know. I thought if I just tried harder, if I could learn to be better—" "Christ!" Elias turned away, his hands shaking. All those trips, and all those weeks away, and this was what he'd left his daughter to. Cole Wilder spoke quietly from his position by the window. "It's not discipline when it leaves marks like that. It's not correction when a child learns to flinch before the blow lands." "How dare you," Vivian said, rounding on him. "You have no right to come into this house." "Enough!" Elias's voice cut through hers like a blade. "I want you out." Vivian froze. "What?" "Out of this house, tonight." "Elias, you can't be serious. This man, this stranger, makes wild accusations. And you just believe—" "I believe my daughter's arms," Elias said, his voice shaking with rage. "I believe the bruises I can see with my own eyes. I believe that mark on her face that she lied to protect you." He moved to the door, yanked it open. Cold air rushed in. "Get out, pack whatever you can carry. I'll send the rest to wherever you decide to land. But I want you gone from here before I do something I'll regret." Vivian's face went through several expressions: shock, fury, calculation. Finally, she drew herself up with icy dignity. "You'll regret this, Elias Hartwell. When you're left alone with a daughter you don't know how to raise—" "I'll manage," Elias said flatly. "Go." Vivian looked at Mara one last time. The hatred in that glance made even Cole Wilder shift slightly. Then she swept from the room, her footsteps sharp on the stairs. The three of them stood in awful silence. Mara was crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. Elias wanted to go to her, to hold her the way he had when she was small. But shame kept him frozen. How had he not seen? How had he been so blind? "Mr. Hartwell," Cole said quietly, "my offer still stands." Elias turned to face him. "You want to take her away? After all this?" "Especially after all this." Cole's gray eyes were steady. "You're angry now. Guilty. But guilt has a way of fading, and anger cools. In a month, maybe 2, you'll start remembering the good times with your wife. Start questioning what really happened." "Mim, I would never—" "Most men would," Cole said. "It's human nature. And Mara would see it happening, and she'd learn to hide things even better next time." He paused. "Or you'll find another wife eventually, someone to help with the house, the business, and the whole thing starts over." The words were brutal, but Elias couldn't argue with them. He knew himself well enough to fear that Cole might be right. "So you're saying I can't protect my own daughter?" "I'm saying she needs protecting from what might happen as much as from what already did. Cole looked at Mara, his expression softening slightly. Up in the high country, there's no one to judge her, no one to call her clumsy or worthless, just hard work and clean air and the chance to learn things that don't require being someone she's not. They heard the front door open and close. Vivian was leaving through the back, taking the route that wouldn't require her to face them again. Good. Elias looked at his daughter, really looked at her, thin from missed meals, bruised from casual violence, terrified despite being in the presence of her own father. "Mara," he said hoarsely, "do you want to go with him?" Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know if I can do it. Mountain living, I mean. I'm not strong. I'm not—" "You're stronger than you think," Cole interrupted. "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about getting back up after you do." She looked at him with those wide, frightened eyes. "You really heard everything yesterday?" "Every word. And you came back anyway?" "I came back because of it." Something in Mara's expression shifted. She turned to her father. "I want to go, Papa. I want to try." Elias felt his heart crack clean through. They left at dawn. I was there to see them off. Brought my wagon by just as the first gray light touched the mountains. Helped Mara pack the few things she wanted to keep. Her mother's shawl, a small stack of letters, the clothes that might serve her in the high country. It all fit in a single canvas pack. Elias stood on the porch watching his daughter prepare to leave. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. When Mara came to say goodbye, he pulled her into an embrace that lasted long enough for the sun to clear the horizon. "Be safe," he whispered. "Be strong." "I'll try." "And Mara, don't ever think you have to earn kindness. You deserve it just for being you." She nodded against his chest. Then she pulled away. Cole was already moving down the street, his long stride eating up the distance. Mara had to hurry to catch up, her smaller steps quick and determined. I stood with Elias and watched them go, two figures disappearing into the gray morning light, the mountain man and the broken girl. "Did I do the right thing?" Elias asked quietly. I thought about Sarah Crane, who died in silence, about the mining camp woman whose name I never learned, about all the times I'd walked past that kitchen window and told myself it wasn't my business. "Yes," I said, "you did the only thing that might save her." We watched until they were out of sight. Then Elias went back inside his empty house, and I climbed onto my wagon and drove away. But something had changed in me. Standing there watching Cole Wilder and Mara Hartwell walk toward the mountains, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe it was too late for Sarah Crane, too late for the mining camp woman, too late for all the victims whose names we never learned. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for Mara. And maybe that was worth something. Jesse stirred the fire, sending up sparks. Outside my cabin, the snow was falling harder now. The same snow that had been falling 22 years ago when Mara Hartwell walked out of Coal Ridge and into the high country. That's where part 1 ends, I told my grandson, with them disappearing into the mountains, with a girl who thought she was worthless beginning a journey that would teach her otherwise. "And you?" Jesse asked. "What did you do?" I looked at him across the dying light. "I did what I should have done from the start," I said. "I helped. Brought supplies up the mountain every 2 weeks, kept my eyes and ears open in town, made sure Cole had warning if trouble was coming." I paused. "But that's a story for part 2. For now, all you need to know is this. Mara Hartwell walked into those mountains a victim. What she became up there, in the cold and the silence and the hard work. That's the transformation that made her a legend." Jesse leaned forward. "Tell me the rest, Grandpa." "Tomorrow," I said. "I'm tired and you need to think about what you've heard so far. About silence and speaking up, about seeing something wrong and deciding whether you're the kind of person who walks past or the kind who knocks on the door." The fire burned lower. The snow fell harder. And somewhere in the darkness, the mountains watched. The way they'd been watching for thousands of years, waiting to see what kind of people we'd choose to be. The trail out of Coal Ridge started easy enough. A wagon road that wound through scattered pines and frost-covered meadows. But within 2 hours, the road had narrowed to a pack trail, and the elevation was climbing. Mara walked behind Cole, watching his broad back move with steady, economical grace. He didn't talk, didn't look back to check if she was keeping up, just maintained that long ground-eating stride that forced her to work to match it. By the time the sun was fully up, her legs were burning. Her breath came in visible puffs. The pack on her shoulders seemed to gain weight with every step. Cole finally paused at a switchback where a fallen log offered a natural seat. "Rest," he said, shrugging off his own pack. "Drink water." Mara collapsed onto the log gratefully, her hands shaking as she uncorked the canteen he'd given her that morning. The water was ice-cold and tasted faintly of metal. Cole pulled out a strip of dried meat and tossed it to her. "Eat. We've got another 4 hours before we stop for the night." Mara caught the meat awkwardly. It was tough and salty, nothing like the meals Vivian had prepared, but her stomach was empty enough that she didn't care. She chewed slowly, studying the man who'd taken her away from everything she knew. "Why did you really do it?" she asked quietly. Cole turned those pale eyes on her. "Do what?" "Come for me. You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I had a sister once, younger than me by 3 years. Our ma died when we were kids, and our pa remarried quick. New wife was pretty, said all the right things." He paused, his jaw working. "But when pa was out working the trap lines, she was someone else. Someone mean." Mara felt her chest tighten. "What happened?" "I didn't know. Not for a long time. My sister was good at hiding it, same way you are. Made excuses for the bruises. Said she was clumsy, accident-prone." Cole's hands curled into fists, then deliberately relaxed. "By the time I figured it out, the damage was done. She didn't believe she deserved anything better. Married the first man who asked, just to get away from that house. And he turned out to be worse than our stepmother ever was. Where is she now?" "Dead. 10 years now." The words were flat, emotionless, but Mara heard the weight underneath them. "Fell down the stairs," they said. "Or he pushed her, doesn't matter which. She was just as dead either way." Mara stared at him, understanding clicking into place. "So when you heard Vivian yesterday, I heard my sister, heard all the things that were said to her that made her think she wasn't worth saving." Cole looked at her directly. "I can't fix what happened to her, but I could do something about what was happening to you." The morning air felt suddenly colder. Mara pulled her mother's shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I'm sorry. About your sister." "Me too." Cole stood, shouldering his pack in one smooth motion. "Ready to keep moving?" I brought supplies up to Cole's cabin 2 weeks after they arrived. The trail was harder than usual. Early snow had already fallen in the high country, making the switchbacks treacherous. But I'd promised to help, and I wasn't going to fail again. When I arrived, I found Mara splitting wood in the clearing beside the cabin. Or trying to. She swung the axe with determination, but little skill. More often than not, the blade bounced off the log without splitting it. Her breath came in gasps. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, but she kept swinging. Cole sat on the porch watching. Not helping, not correcting, just watching. "You're letting her struggle," I said, climbing down from the wagon. "She's learning," Cole replied. "Can't learn if someone does it for you." As if to prove his point, Mara finally landed a solid blow. The log split clean in two. She stood there, staring at the pieces like she couldn't quite believe what she'd done. Then she picked up another log and positioned it on the stump. "She's been at it for an hour," Cole said quietly. "Split maybe 10 logs total, but every one of them she did herself." I watched Mara work, saw the determination in the set of her shoulders, the way she adjusted her grip, her stance, learning from each attempt. This wasn't the frightened girl who'd left Cole Ridge, or maybe it was, but something was changing, something fundamental. "Town's talking," I told Cole, "about you taking her. Some folks are worried. Others are saying worse things. Let them talk. Vivian's spreading stories. Says you coerced her, that Elias was too distraught to think clearly. Cole's expression didn't change. What does Elias say? Standing firm? Told the preacher that Mara's where she needs to be. But it's eating at him, Cole. The guilt. Good. Maybe it'll keep him from making the same mistake twice. We unloaded the supplies in silence. Flour, coffee, salt, dried beans, things that would see them through the worst of winter. When we were done, Mara came over, her face flushed with effort. "Mr. Brennan," she said, slightly breathless. "It's good to see you. You too, girl. How are you settling in?" She glanced at the pile of split wood behind her. A smile ghosted across her face, the first genuine smile I'd seen on her in years. "I'm learning," she said, and I believed her. That night, after the fire had burned down and Mara had climbed to the loft, I sat with Cole on the porch. The cold was bitter, but neither of us wanted to go inside just yet. "Tell me about Sarah," I said. "The whole story." Cole was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice rough in the darkness. "She was 14 when it started. I was 17, working the lines with Pa, gone for days at a time." He paused. "The stepmother, Catherine was her name, she was careful. Only hit Sarah where it wouldn't show, only said the cruel things when no one else could hear." "How'd you find out?" "Came home early one day. Fever had taken some of the camps, and Pa wanted to avoid it. Walked in and heard Catherine screaming at Sarah. Called her stupid, worthless, a burden, said she was lucky anyone bothered to feed her." Cole's hands tightened on the porch rail. Sarah just stood there, taking it, like she believed every word. "What did you do?" "Confronted Catherine. Told Pa what I'd heard. He didn't believe me. Said I must have misunderstood that Catherine was a good woman trying to discipline a difficult child." "And Sarah?" "Backed Catherine's story. Said I'd gotten it wrong. That Catherine was just correcting her for breaking a dish." Cole's voice cracked. "She protected the woman who was destroying her, because she thought that's what she deserved." I let the silence sit for a moment. "Is that why you left? After Sarah died?" "Partly, but there was more to it." He told me then about the mining camp, about the woman he'd heard being beaten, about standing outside that door knowing what was happening and walking away. "Found her dead the next morning," he said. "Captain's wife. Beaten so bad they had to identify her by her wedding ring. That's a heavy load to carry." "It is, but it's mine to carry." Cole looked toward the cabin where Mara slept in the loft. "I can't bring them back, Sarah or that woman, but maybe I can keep it from happening again, at least once." "What if it's not enough?" I asked. "What if one rescue doesn't balance the scales?" "It doesn't," Cole said simply. "But it's what I can do, so I'm doing it." February came in like a wolf. I'd seen bad winters in my 40 years in these mountains, but the blizzard that hit in mid-February was something else entirely. It blew in without warning. 1 hour, clear skies. The next, whiteout conditions. I was 3 days late bringing supplies because the lower trails were impassable. When I finally made it up to the cabin, what I found stopped my heart. The door was barred from the outside, which made no sense. Smoke rose from the chimney, so someone was inside, but why bar it from outside? I lifted the beam and pushed in. Mara stood by the fire, a rifle in her hands. Her face was drawn, exhausted. At her feet, Cole lay on a makeshift pallet, his legs splinted and wrapped. "Tom," she said, and her voice nearly broke, "thank God. I wasn't sure anyone would come." "What happened?" "The storm. 3 days ago. Cole went to check the trap line. Told me to stay here." She set the rifle down carefully. "He was gone too long. Hours. I knew something was wrong." "So you went after him?" "I had to." Mara knelt beside Cole, checking the splint with practiced movements. "Found him a mile out, leg broken, half buried in a drift. He was unconscious." I stared at her. A 16-year-old girl who'd been in the mountains for barely 3 months, going out into a blizzard to search for a man twice her size. "How'd you get him back?" "Dragged him." She said it simply, like it was nothing. "Took me 4 hours. Made a travois from branches. Used my shawl for the binding. Got him back here just as it got dark." I looked at Cole's leg. The splint was crude but solid, the leg set straight. You did this? He taught me, showed me on a rabbit we'd trapped, said you never know when you'll need to set a bone. Mara's hands were steady as she adjusted the blanket over Cole. He woke up yesterday. Fever's down now. I think he'll be all right. Cole's eyes opened then, focused on Mara with an expression I couldn't quite read. She saved me, he said hoarsely. I told her to stay in the cabin. She disobeyed. Good thing she did, I said. Yeah. Something that might have been pride crossed Cole's face. Good thing. Jesse interrupted my telling then, his young face troubled in the firelight. She saved him? But I thought he was supposed to be saving her. That's the thing about rescue, I told my grandson. It's not always one direction. Sometimes the person being saved ends up doing the saving. Sometimes that's how you know the rescue worked, when the victim becomes strong enough to help others. So Mara wasn't a victim anymore. She was becoming something else, someone who'd been broken and put herself back together, someone who knew what real strength looked like. I poked at the fire, remembering. But that's also when things got complicated. Because down in Coal Ridge, Vivian Fletcher was doing her own kind of work, and she'd figured out something dangerous. It happened in late February, when the passes were still closed but the town was stirring from winter isolation. Vivian had stayed in Coal Ridge, taking rooms at the boarding house, playing the tragic stepmother, cruelly cast out by a husband who'd believed lies over her years of devoted service. Some folks believed her, others didn't, but everyone had an opinion about the girl who'd gone to live with the mountain man. I was in the general store when I heard Vivian talking to the shopkeeper. I'm worried about her, she was saying, her voice honey-sweet. That poor child, alone up there with a strange man. Anything could be happening. Elias says she's fine, the shopkeeper replied. Says she writes to him regular. Written under duress, perhaps? Vivian's blue eyes were wide with concern. We can't know what that man is making her do, what threats he might have made. The shopkeeper looked uncomfortable. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them what I'd seen. Mara thriving, growing stronger every day. Then Vivian's gaze fell on something behind the counter, a wanted poster that had come in with the last mail delivery before the passes closed. Her face went still. That man, she said slowly. The army deserter. What's his name? The shopkeeper glanced at the poster. William Crane, wanted for desertion 15 years back. Why? But Vivian was already moving toward the door. I saw her face as she passed, calculation and triumph mixed together. She knew. Somehow, she'd recognized Cole Wilder as William Crane. I left the store and rode straight for the sheriff's office. Henry Morrison was new to Coal Ridge, brought in the previous fall to establish proper law. He was a by-the-book man, which meant he could be reasoned with, or so I hoped. Sheriff, I said, we need to talk about Cole Wilder. Morrison looked up from his paperwork. The mountain man who took the Hartwell girl, what about him? His real name is William Crane, Army Scout, dishonorably discharged 15 years ago. There's probably a warrant out for desertion. Morrison's expression hardened. You're telling me there's a wanted man living in my territory with a minor child? I'm telling you the full story before someone else tells you half of it. I spent the next hour laying it out for him. Fletcher's corruption, Cole's attempt to report abuse, the false charges, the mining camp woman, Sarah Crane, everything. Morrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. That's a hell of a story, Brennan, but it doesn't change the fact that there's a warrant. The warrant was issued by a corrupt officer. Cole was trying to do the right thing. Maybe, but I'm still bound by law to investigate. Morrison stood, reaching for his coat. And if Vivian Fletcher has figured out who he is, she's going to use it, which means I need to get ahead of this before it becomes a mess. You're going up there? Not until spring. Passes won't clear for another month at least. He paused. But when they do, I'll need answers. And I'll need to hear from the girl herself that she's there willingly. I left the sheriff's office with a sick feeling in my gut. Vivian had her weapon now, and come spring, she'd use it. I made it up to the cabin in early March, as soon as the trail was barely passable. Cole was healed, walking with a slight limp, but otherwise recovered. Mara looked different than she had in February. Leaner, stronger, moving through the cabin with quiet confidence. They were preparing for spring, checking equipment, planning for when the hunting would improve. Working side by side like they'd been doing it for years. I hated to ruin it. "We need to talk," I said, "all of us." Over coffee, I told them about Vivian's recognition, about the wanted poster, about Sheriff Morrison's promise to investigate come spring. Cole listened without expression, but I saw his hands tighten around his cup. "So she knows," he said quietly. "She knows, and she's going to use it." "Use it how?" Mara asked. I looked at her, this girl who'd dragged a grown man through a blizzard, who'd learned to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. "She's going to claim Cole kidnapped you, that he's a wanted criminal who coerced your father, and with the army warrant, the sheriff will have to bring him in." "But that's not what happened," Mara said. Her voice was steady. "I chose to come here. Papa agreed. Vivian can't just lie." "She can," Cole said, "and people will believe her, because I am a deserter. That part's true." He set down his cup and looked at me. "When are they coming?" "April, probably. Soon as the pass is clear enough for horses." "That gives us a month." "To do what?" I asked. Cole looked at Mara, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "To decide," he said, "whether we run deeper into the mountains or whether we go down and face it." Mara didn't hesitate. "We face it," she said. "I'm not running, and I'm not lying to make people comfortable." "It could cost everything," Cole warned. "They could take me, put me in chains, send me back to face court-martial." "Then I'll tell them the truth," Mara said. Her voice was iron now. "I'll tell them about Vivian, about the bruises, about every single time she hit me and called me worthless." She stood, moving to the window, looking out at the mountains that had become her home. "I was silent for 3 years. Let her hurt me because I thought I deserved it, thought if I just tried harder, I could be good enough." She turned back to us. "I'm not that girl anymore, and I'm done being silent." I sat back in my chair looking at Jessie across the dying fire. Outside, the snow had stopped. The night was clear and cold, the kind of cold that makes the stars look sharp enough to cut. "That's where part 2 ends," I told him, "with spring coming, with Vivian armed and dangerous, with Mara deciding she'd rather tell the truth than stay safe." "What happened when they came?" Jessie asked. "The sheriff and Vivian?" "That's part 3, I said. "The confrontation, the trial. The moment when a whole town had to decide whether they'd believe a respectable woman or a scared girl. Whether they'd see the truth that had been in front of them all along." I looked at my grandson's face, saw the question forming. "But before we get to that, you need to understand something. What made Mara dangerous to Vivian wasn't that she'd gotten strong. It was that she'd stopped being afraid. Fear is what keeps victims silent. Take away the fear, and silence becomes choice. And Mara chose to speak." Jessie nodded slowly. "That's what you've been trying to tell me, isn't it? About silence being a choice?" "Yes," I said. "And about how the hardest part of speaking up isn't finding the courage. It's accepting that the truth might not be enough, that you might lose anyway. But you speak it anyway, because some silences cost more than we can afford to pay." The fire crackled. The wind picked up outside. And in my memory, I saw them again. Cole Wilder and Mara Hartwell, standing on that cabin porch in early March, looking down at the valley where judgment waited. Not running, not hiding, ready to face whatever came. April came to the high country like a promise half kept. The snow melted in the valleys, turning the trails to rivers of mud, but the peaks still held their white caps and the nights were cold enough to freeze water solid. I made the trip up to Cole's cabin every week once the trail opened, bringing news from town, supplies they'd need, warnings about what was coming, because it was coming. Everyone in Coal Ridge knew it. Sheriff Morrison was a patient man, but he was also a thorough one. He spent March gathering statements, reviewing old Army records, talking to anyone who'd known Cole Wilder or Vivian Fletcher, building his case like a prosecutor, not a lawman. And Vivian, she was patient too, stayed in her boarding house rooms, played the concerned stepmother, waited for the snow to clear. She knew what she had: the wanted poster, the Army warrant, the respectable facade she'd built in 3 years of marriage to Elias Hartwell. What she didn't know was that I'd been talking to people too. Dr. Hart, who'd treated Mara's accidents for years, the preacher's wife, who'd noticed bruises at church, the shopkeeper who'd seen Mara flinch at sudden movements. One by one, I asked them the same question: what did you see, and why didn't you say anything? Most of them had the same answer I did: it wasn't my business. But now it was everyone's business, and that made folks uncomfortable. The posse rode out on April 15th. Sheriff Morrison, 8 men from town, and Vivian Fletcher. They said she insisted on coming to make sure Mara was safe. I rode with them. Someone needed to be there who knew the truth. The trail was treacherous with spring runoff, but we made decent time. By late afternoon, we were within a mile of Cole's cabin. That's when Morrison called a halt. "Brennan," he said, "you know this man. You think he'll fight?" I looked at the armed men around me. Good men, mostly, but scared men too, scared of what they'd find up there, scared of what it would mean if they'd been wrong about Vivian all along. "He won't fight," I said, "but he won't surrender easy either. Not if he thinks you're taking the girl against her will." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then you go first. Tell him we're coming. Tell him we just want to talk." I rode ahead alone, leaving the posse behind. When I reached the clearing, I found Cole and Mara on the porch, like they'd been waiting. Cole had his rifle leaning against the wall behind him, not threatening, but ready. Mara stood beside him in buckskin and wool, her hair in a single braid down her back. She looked like she belonged there, against that backdrop of pine and stone, like the mountain had claimed her and made her its own. "They're coming," I said. "Sheriff Morrison, 8 men, and Vivian." Cole's expression didn't change, but Mara's hand moved to grip the porch rail. "How long?" Cole asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." "Good." Cole looked at Mara. "Last chance to change your mind. We could be gone before they arrive, deeper into the mountains, where they'd never find us." Mara shook her head. "No more running, no more hiding. I'm done with that." She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago, something hard and certain and unbreakable. "Let them come," she said. Jesse leaned forward, the firelight catching his young face. "What happened when they arrived? Did they try to take her?" "They tried," I said. "But Mara wasn't the frightened girl they expected, and that changed everything." They came into the clearing with the sun behind them, making their shadows long. Sheriff Morrison in front, the 8 men flanking him, Vivian bringing up the rear on a borrowed horse. Mara stood on the porch with her rifle in her hands, not aimed at anyone, but held ready across her chest, a statement. The posse pulled up short. "Miss Hartwell," Morrison said carefully, "we're here to make sure you're all right, to offer you safe passage back to Coal Ridge if you want it." "I'm fine," Mara said, her voice carried across the clearing, steady and clear. "And I don't want safe passage anywhere. This is my home now." Morrison shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "Miss, we have concerns. About your age, about the propriety of this arrangement, about whether you're here of your own free will. I'm here because I chose to be here, because my father agreed to it, because this is the first place I've felt safe in 3 years." One of the posse men spoke up, Bill Sanders, who worked at the mill. "Girl, you don't know what you're saying. You've been isolated up here, away from proper society. That man could have told you anything." "That man saved my life," Mara cut him off, while everyone in Coal Ridge looked the other way. Vivian urged her horse forward then, her face a mask of concern. "Mara, darling, you don't have to protect him. Whatever he's done, whatever he's threatened you with, we can keep you safe now." Mara's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Safe? Like I was safe in your house, Vivian, when you beat me for breaking a bowl? When you grabbed my hair and called me worthless? When you left bruises where my father wouldn't see them?" The words fell into the clearing like stones into still water. Vivian's face flickered, just for a moment, the mask slipping. But she recovered quickly. "Sheriff, you see how confused she is. The poor child has been subjected to who knows what kind of manipulation." "I see just fine," Morrison said quietly. His eyes were on Mara's face, measuring. "Miss Hartwell, we've received information that Mr. Wilder here is actually a man named William Crane, an Army deserter wanted for court-martial. Is that true?" Cole stepped forward then, and the posse men tensed. "It's true," he said. "My name is William Crane. I served as a scout for the Army 15 years back. And I deserted after I tried to report an officer for beating his wife and got court-martialed for my trouble." Morrison pulled a paper from his coat. "Says here you abandoned your post, made false allegations against a superior officer, were dishonorably discharged." "That's what it says," Cole agreed, "but it's not what happened." "Then tell me what happened." Cole's gray eyes swept the clearing, settling finally on Vivian Fletcher. "The officer who court-martialed me was Captain James Fletcher. He was beating his wife. I reported it through proper channels. Next thing I know, I'm facing charges for desertion and making false statements. The fix was in before the trial even started." He paused. "Captain Fletcher's wife stood up in that courtroom and called me a liar. Said her husband was a good man, that I was a troublemaker trying to ruin his career. The Army believed her. Stripped my rank, discharged me dishonorably." Morrison frowned. "What's this got to do with—" "Fletcher's wife's name was Vivian," Cole said. "Vivian Fletcher, same woman sitting on that horse right now." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye turned to Vivian. Her face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "That's absurd. I never—" "You stood in that courtroom in 1866, Cole said. His voice was level but hard. "Fort Laramie. You wore a blue dress with black trim. You called me a liar to protect the man who beat you. And 6 months later, Captain Fletcher fell down the stairs and broke his neck." Vivian's horse danced sideways, responding to her tension. "You can't prove any of this. This is a desperate man making wild accusations." "I can prove it," Morrison said quietly. He pulled another paper from his coat. "I sent a wire to Fort Laramie a month ago, asked about the Fletcher court-martial. They sent back the full record." He looked at Vivian, and his expression was hard. "Captain James Fletcher was posthumously investigated. Turns out there were multiple complaints about his conduct, all buried. The Army overturned Crane's court-martial 3 years ago, issued a full exoneration." The clearing went silent again. Vivian's face was a war between rage and calculation. "So he's not a deserter," Morrison continued. "He's an exonerated veteran who tried to do the right thing and got punished for it." He looked at Cole. "The Army owes you an apology, Mr. Crane, and back pay if you want it." "Don't want their money," Cole said. "Just want to be left alone." Morrison turned back to Vivian. His voice was colder now. "Mrs. Fletcher, or is it Mrs. Hartwell now? I have some questions about your first husband's death, and about the allegations of abuse against Miss Hartwell here." Vivian's horse wheeled. For a moment, I thought she might run. Instead, she straightened in the saddle, her voice dripping with honey-sweet venom. "You believe this girl over me? This clumsy, worthless child who can't do anything right? Who broke valuable property and needed discipline? You're all fools." The mask was off now. The real Vivian Fletcher, the one Mara had lived with for 3 years, was finally visible to everyone. "I took that man's lies once," she continued, pointing at Cole. "Cost him his career. I can do it again. Who do you think this town will believe? A respected widow, or a mountain hermit and the girl he's clearly corrupted?" Mara's voice cut through the clearing. "Show them, Dr. Hart." I turned and saw Samuel Hart at the edge of the clearing. I hadn't noticed him ride up with the posse. He was an old man, weathered and tired, but his eyes were clear. He pulled out a leather journal from his saddlebag and dismounted. "I've been the doctor in Coal Ridge for 30 years, he said. His voice was quiet but carried. "And in those 30 years, I've treated Mara Hartwell for accidents 17 times. He opened the journal, reading, November 1878, bruised ribs, claimed she fell downstairs. March 1879, sprained wrist, claimed she caught it in a door. June 1879, split lip, claimed she walked into a cabinet. He looked up at the assembled men, and so on. 17 incidents, all after Vivian Fletcher married Elias Hartwell. I documented every one. Dates, injuries, excuses. I suspected abuse, and I said nothing. Hart's voice broke. I told myself I needed proof, that I couldn't accuse a respectable woman without evidence, that it wasn't my place. He closed the journal and looked at Mara. I'm sorry, child. I saw what was happening, and I chose my reputation over your safety. That's on me, but I won't stay silent anymore. The clearing was quiet except for the wind through the pines. Sheriff Morrison looked around at the assembled men, at Vivian, cornered and furious, at Mara, standing tall on that porch with a rifle in her hands and iron in her spine. We're going back to Coal Ridge, he said, all of us, and we're going to have a proper inquiry. Let everyone speak their piece, present their evidence, and let the truth come out. And if I refuse, Vivian asked, then I'll arrest you for suspicion of assault. Your choice, ma'am. Vivian's eyes swept the clearing. She was calculating, I could see it, looking for an escape, a way to turn this around. She wouldn't find one. Not this time. We made camp that night halfway down the mountain. Vivian was kept under watch, though Morrison hadn't put her in irons. Not yet. I sat with Cole and Mara by their fire, apart from the main camp. This isn't over, Cole said quietly. She'll find a way to twist it, make herself the victim. Let her try, Mara said. I'm not afraid of her anymore. You should be. Cornered animals are dangerous. Mara looked at him, and her smile was sad. I've been a cornered animal for 3 years. I know how dangerous it is. She paused. But I'm not cornered anymore. I have you. I have Tom. I have Dr. Hart. I have the truth. Truth doesn't always win, I said. No, Mara agreed. But silence always loses, and I'm done being silent. Across the camp, I could see Vivian sitting by her fire, one of Morrison's men watching her. She was staring into the flames, her face expressionless, but I knew what she was thinking. I'd seen that look before, on desperate people who'd run out of options. She was planning something. One last play. And when a woman like Vivian Fletcher gets desperate, people get hurt. Jesse stirred the fire in my cabin, his face troubled. What did she do, Grandpa? What was her last play? That's where part 3 ends, I told him, with all of us heading back to Coal Ridge, with Vivian cornered and dangerous, with Mara ready to speak truth and the town ready to finally listen. I paused, remembering. The confrontation was coming. The moment when everyone who'd stayed silent, me, Dr. Hart, the preacher's wife, the shopkeeper, all of us, would have to choose. Stand with the truth or stay comfortable in our lies. And which did you choose? I looked at my grandson across the dying fire. That's part 4, I said. The trial. The testimony. The moment when I had to stand up in front of the whole town and admit I'd promised a dying woman I'd protect her daughter, and then I'd done nothing while that child was beaten and broken. I took a breath. That's the hardest part of the story, Jesse. Not because of what Vivian did, but because of what I didn't do. And because even after I spoke up, even after I told the truth, I had to live with the knowledge that I'd waited too long. Outside, the wind picked up. The snow had stopped, but the cold was settling in, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. The truth set Mara free, I said quietly, but it cost all of us something. That's what you need to understand before we get to the end. Truth has a price, and sometimes the people who pay it aren't the ones who deserve to. Jesse nodded slowly, his young face serious. Tell me the rest, Grandpa. All of it. Tomorrow, I said. When you've had time to think about what I've told you so far, about silence and speaking up, about seeing wrong and deciding whether you're the kind of person who looks away or the kind who speaks. The fire burned lower, the night grew colder, and in my memory, I saw us all riding down that mountain toward Coal Ridge, toward judgment, toward the moment when a whole town would have to face what they'd allowed to happen, toward the truth that would change everything. The town hall in Coal Ridge wasn't built for what happened on April 18, 1882. It was meant for county meetings, social dances, the occasional traveling preacher, not for a whole community to face its conscience. But that's what it became that day. Sheriff Morrison didn't call it a trial. He called it an inquiry. But everyone knew what it really was, a reckoning. For Vivian Fletcher, for Mara Hartwell, for all of us who'd seen and stayed silent. The hall was packed by the time I arrived. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls. I recognized most of them. Bill Sanders from the mill, the preacher and his wife, the shopkeeper, folks who'd known Mara since she was small, folks who'd watched her change after Vivian came, folks who'd said nothing. Elias Hartwell sat in the front row, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 6 months. When Mara walked in with Cole beside her, he stood up, just stood there looking at his daughter like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Mara went to him, hugged him briefly, whispered something I couldn't hear. When she pulled back, Elias was crying. Vivian sat on the opposite side of the room, flanked by 2 of Morrison's men. She'd regained her composure during the ride down, sat there now in her perfect dress, her blonde hair pinned just so, wearing an expression of dignified suffering. But I saw her eyes, cold and calculating, looking for weaknesses, angles, ways to win. Sheriff Morrison stood at the front of the room and called for order. "This is an inquiry," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We're here to establish facts about Mara Hartwell's situation, about Vivian Fletcher's conduct, about whether any crimes were committed." He paused, looking around the room. "Everyone who speaks here does so under oath. Lying is perjury, and I'll prosecute it. So think careful before you open your mouth." He pulled out a paper and read the charges. Assault, child abuse, false imprisonment, making false statements to law enforcement. Then he called his first witness, Dr. Samuel Hart. The old doctor walked to the front slowly. His hands were shaking when he placed them on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Morrison asked him about the journal, about the 17 documented accidents. Hart answered in a voice that got quieter with each word. "And did you believe these were accidents?" Morrison asked. Hart was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "I suspected abuse. The pattern was clear. Same kind of injuries, always explained as clumsiness or mishap, bruises in the shape of fingers, split lips, injuries consistent with being struck or grabbed." "Why didn't you report your suspicions?" "Because I didn't want to believe it. Because Mrs. Fletcher was a respected member of the community. Because I told myself I needed absolute proof before making such an accusation." Hart's voice broke. "And because I was a coward. I chose my reputation over a child's safety." The room was silent, people shifting uncomfortably, not meeting each other's eyes. Because they all knew. In that moment, watching Dr. Hart confess, they all knew they'd done the same thing. Morrison thanked Hart and called the next witness, Thomas Brennan. My legs felt weak walking to the front. Every eye in that room was on me. I put my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, knowing that the truth was going to condemn me. Morrison asked me about my deliveries to the Hartwell house, about what I'd seen and heard, about the promise I'd made to Sarah Hartwell. I told him everything, the bruises, the sounds through windows, the way Mara flinched at sudden movements, the promise I'd made and broken. "You promised her mother you'd watch over her," Morrison said. "Why didn't you act when you saw the abuse?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Because I told myself it wasn't my business," I said. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. "Because I didn't want trouble. Because speaking up might cost me customers, might make folks uncomfortable, might force me to choose sides." I looked at Mara, sitting there in her buckskin and wool. "I chose comfort over courage, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Morrison nodded slowly. "Did Cole Wilder know about your promise to Sarah Hartwell?" "No. He intervened on his own. Because he's a better man than I am. I stepped down and took my seat. Couldn't look at anyone, just stared at my hands and felt the weight of every day I'd stayed silent. Morrison called others then, the preacher's wife, who'd seen bruises at church and said nothing. The shopkeeper who'd watched Mara grow thin and quiet and told himself it wasn't his concern. The neighbor woman who'd heard sounds through walls and convinced herself it was just discipline. One by one they confessed, not because they were brave, because the truth was finally too big to ignore. Then Morrison turned to Vivian. "Mrs. Fletcher, you have the right to speak in your own defense. Do you wish to testify?" Vivian stood gracefully, walked to the front with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible like she was doing them all a favor. "I do," she said. Her voice was honey-sweet again. "Because these accusations are absurd. Mara was a difficult child, clumsy, disobedient, prone to exaggeration. I tried my best to teach her proper behavior, to make her into a respectable young woman." She looked around the room, her blue eyes wide and innocent. "Sometimes that required correction, a firm hand, the kind of discipline any good parent provides. If she got bruises, it was from her own carelessness, not from any cruelty on my part." "You're saying Dr. Hart is lying?" Morrison asked. "That his journal documenting 17 injuries is fabricated?" "I'm saying he's an old man who sees what he wants to see, who's been swayed by a mountain hermit with a grudge against the army." She turned to Cole, and her voice took on an edge. "William Crane destroyed his own career with false accusations. Now he's trying to destroy mine. He's manipulated that girl, isolated her, turned her against her own family." "Enough." The word cut through the room like a knife. Mara stood up, walked to the front without waiting to be called. Morrison started to say something, but Mara was already there, standing face to face with Vivian. "You want to talk about manipulation?" Mara said. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of that packed room. "Let's talk about it." She turned to face the crowd. "For 3 years, Vivian Fletcher told me I was worthless, that I was clumsy, stupid, a burden, that I couldn't do anything right, that I should be grateful anyone bothered to feed me." Mara pulled up her sleeve. The old bruises were faded now, but the scars from newer injuries stood out pale against her skin. "She hit me when I broke things, when I moved too slow, when I asked questions, when I existed in ways that annoyed her." Mara's voice didn't waver, didn't break. She spoke like she was reciting facts, not describing her own suffering. "I believed her. I thought I deserved it. Thought if I could just be better, smarter, less clumsy, she'd stop. But there was no being good enough, because it was never about me. It was about her need to hurt someone smaller, someone who couldn't fight back." She looked at Vivian then, and her eyes were hard as stone. "You called me worthless, but I'm not. You said I was clumsy, but I can split wood, trap game, set a broken leg, survive a blizzard. You said no one would want me, but Cole Wilder risked everything to give me a chance. My father supports me. Tom helps me. Dr. Hart finally told the truth for me." Mara's voice grew stronger. "I'm not worthless. I'm not stupid. I'm not clumsy. I'm a girl who was beaten and told she deserved it, and I believed that lie for 3 years. She stepped closer to Vivian. "But I don't believe it anymore, and I won't be silent anymore. So you can call me a liar. You can say I'm manipulated. You can try to twist this however you want. But everyone in this room knows the truth now, and they can choose, believe you or believe their own eyes." The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian's face had gone through several expressions during Mara's speech. Shock, fury, calculation. Now she settled on cold dignity. "The girl is clearly unwell," she said. "Living in the wilderness has affected her mind." "Ma'am," Morrison interrupted, "I've heard enough." He looked around the room, at the packed benches, at the witnesses who'd confessed, at Mara standing there with iron in her spine. "Based on the testimony I've heard from Dr. Hart, from Mr. Brennan, from others, I'm finding probable cause for assault charges against Vivian Fletcher." Vivian's composure cracked. "You can't be serious. You're going to take the word of a child over—" "I'm taking the word of a physician's documented evidence," Morrison said, "and the word of multiple witnesses who finally found the courage to speak up." He gestured to his deputies. "Mrs. Fletcher, you're under arrest. You'll be held pending formal charges." That's when Vivian ran. She was fast. I'll give her that. Knocked over a chair, pushed through the crowd, made it to the door before anyone could react. Morrison shouted for his men, but Vivian was already out the door. By the time they got outside, she'd mounted a horse, someone's horse, didn't matter whose, and was galloping out of town. Morrison sent men after her, but they lost her trail in the foothills. She knew those mountains well enough to disappear, and she had nothing left to lose. We searched for 3 days, found the horse wandering loose, found no sign of Vivian. She was gone, vanished into the territory like smoke. Some folks wanted to keep searching, form bigger posses, track her across the territory, make sure she faced justice. But Mara surprised them. "Let her go," she said. We were standing in the sheriff's office, me, Morrison, Elias, Cole, and Mara. "She's a fugitive," Morrison said. "She should answer for what she did." "She's already answered," Mara replied. "Everyone in that town hall knows what she is now. Her mask is gone. Her reputation is destroyed. She's running with nothing but the clothes on her back, probably heading back east to hide." Mara looked out the window toward the mountains. "She can't hurt me anymore. That's what matters. Whether she's in jail or running doesn't change that I'm free." Morrison didn't look happy about it, but he didn't argue. Vivian Fletcher was never found. Some said she made it back to Philadelphia, changed her name, started over. Others said she died in those mountains, and the wilderness took her bones. I don't know which is true, don't much care to be honest. She was gone, and Mara was free. That was enough. After the inquiry, Elias asked Mara the question everyone was thinking. "Will you come home?" They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house where Elias was staying. Cole and I gave them privacy, but I could see them through the window, father and daughter, trying to rebuild what had been broken. Mara was quiet for a long time. "This is home, Papa," she finally said, gesturing toward the mountains. "Up there, that cabin, that life." "You're 17 years old," Elias said gently. "You have your whole life ahead of you. You could go to school, learn a trade, meet people your own age. I have learned a trade, survival, self-reliance, how to be strong without being cruel, how to help without trying to control." She took her father's hand. "I'm not running away from you, Papa, but I can't go back to being that scared girl who lived in your house. She doesn't exist anymore." Elias was crying openly now. "I failed you," he said. "I should have seen, should have protected you, should have—" "You're protecting me now," Mara said, "by letting me choose, by respecting that I know what I need. What about later, when you're older, when you want more than a cabin in the mountains? Then I'll come down and find it, but on my terms, not because I'm running from something, but because I'm choosing something new." She smiled at him, and it was the first real smile I'd seen on her face in years. "The mountain gave me back to myself, Papa. Don't ask me to leave it yet." Elias nodded slowly, wiped his eyes. "Then I'll move closer, to Cedar Falls maybe, so I can visit more often, so you're not so far away." "I'd like that." They sat together as the sun set behind the peaks, and for the first time in 3 years, they looked like a father and daughter again. Jessie interrupted my story then, leaning forward in the firelight. "So she stayed? She never came back down?" "She stayed," I confirmed. "But not forever, and not just for herself." I poked at the fire, gathering my thoughts. "This is the part that matters most, boy, the part that makes the story worth telling." Summer came, and Mara returned to the high country with Cole. But something had changed. She wasn't just learning anymore. She was building. Using the money from the land Elias had bought her, she started construction on a cabin of her own. Not far from Cole's, but separate. Her own space, her own home. I helped with the building when I could. So did Elias, making the trip up from Cedar Falls once he got settled there. Even some folks from Coal Ridge came up. Dr. Hart, the preacher, others who were trying to make amends for their silence. We built that cabin over the summer of 1882, small but solid. One room with a loft, a good stone fireplace, windows facing east to catch the morning sun. Mara turned 18 that June. By September, she was living in her own home, on her own land, answering to no one but herself. But she didn't isolate. That's the thing people don't understand about her story. She could have disappeared into those mountains, lived alone, shut everyone out. Instead, she opened her door. The first one came in the spring of 1883. A woman from a settlement 20 miles west heard about Mara through travelers, showed up at the cabin with a black eye and 2 small children, asking if the stories were true, if there was really a woman in these mountains who'd escaped. Mara took her in, taught her the same skills Cole had taught her: how to trap, hunt, preserve food, how to build a life with your own hands, how to be strong without needing someone else's permission. After that, others came. Not many, maybe 1 or 2 a year. But they came. Women who needed to learn that they could survive on their own, that they weren't worthless or stupid or deserving of cruelty. Mara taught them all. Some stayed in the high country. Others went back down with new skills and new confidence, built different lives than the ones they'd left. And slowly, very slowly, things started to change in Coal Ridge too. Dr. Hart trained his replacement to ask questions, to document injuries, to speak up when patterns emerged. The preacher's wife started a women's group at the church, a place where folks could talk about hard things without judgment. Morrison made it known that complaints about abuse would be investigated. That silence wouldn't be tolerated from law enforcement. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. There were still people who looked away, still victims who stayed silent, still abusers who never faced justice. But it was better than it had been. And that was something. I visited Mara regularly over the years, watched her grow from that 17-year-old girl into a woman of strength and purpose. Cole stayed nearby in his own cabin. Their relationship never became romance. Some folks expected that, but it wasn't that kind of story. He was her teacher, her protector, her friend, more like family than anything else. He died in the winter of 1898, peaceful in his sleep. Mara was with him at the end. She buried him on the mountain, in a spot overlooking the valley, put up a marker that read, "William Crane, he saw, he spoke, he saved." After that, she carried on alone, still teaching women who found their way to her, still living on her own terms. The last time I saw her was 8 years ago. I was 66 then, already feeling the years catching up with me. Made the trip up to her cabin one last time before my legs got too unreliable for the trail. She was 46 years old, gray in her hair, lines around her eyes, hands weathered from decades of hard work. But strong, still strong. We sat on her porch and talked about old times, about Cole and Sarah and all the people we'd failed to save, about the ones we had saved, about whether any of it balanced out in the end. "You still carry the guilt," she said. It wasn't a question. "Every day," I admitted, "for not acting sooner, for letting you suffer while I made deliveries and kept my mouth shut." Mara was quiet for a moment. "You know what I learned up here?" she finally said. "That guilt only matters if you let it make you better. If you just carry it like a weight, it's worthless. But if you let it teach you to speak up next time, to act when it matters, then maybe it's worth something." "Did I speak up in time?" I asked. "Or was it too late?" "You spoke up," she said simply. "That's what matters. And you helped afterward, brought supplies, spread word, stood with me when others might have turned away." She smiled, and I saw an echo of the girl she'd been. "The silence before, that's on you. But the speaking after, that counts too. Don't discount it." Jesse's voice pulled me back to the present, to my cabin, the dying fire, the snow outside. "Is she still up there, Grandpa? Is she still alive?" I looked at my grandson's young, hopeful face. "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's been 8 years since I saw her. She'd be 54 now. She could be gone, could still be there, teaching women who need her. I paused. But here's what I do know. Whether she's alive or not, what she did matters. The women she helped, they're still out there, teaching their daughters to be strong, refusing to accept abuse, speaking up when they see wrong. I leaned forward, making sure Jesse understood. That's how change really happens, boy. Not in one big moment, but in all the small moments after, in all the people who learn the lesson and pass it on. The fire had burned down to coals. Outside the night was deep and cold. Jesse sat across from me, processing everything I'd told him. "Why did you wait until now to tell me this?" he asked. "Why not years ago?" "Because you weren't ready," I said. "And because I wasn't ready to admit my part in it. Guilt is a funny thing, makes you want to hide the story instead of telling it." I coughed and it rattled in my chest, a reminder that time was running out. "I'm dying, Jesse. This cough isn't getting better. And before I go, you needed to know this story, needed to understand what silence costs." "What do you want me to do with it?" "I want you to remember it," I said. "When you see someone being hurt, when you hear things that don't sit right, when you have that moment where you can choose to speak up or look away." I met his eyes across the coals. "I want you to be better than I was. Don't wait. Don't tell yourself it's not your business. Don't choose comfort over courage." Jesse nodded slowly. "And if speaking up costs me something?" "It will," I said. "It always does. But staying silent costs more. It cost me 30 years of guilt. It cost Dr. Hart his peace. It cost Mara 3 years of suffering she shouldn't have had to endure." I took a breath, feeling the weight of all those years. "The truth is, Jesse, we're all going to fail someone. We're all going to have moments where we don't act fast enough, don't speak loud enough, don't do enough. Then what's the point? The point is to fail less, to speak up more, to choose courage over comfort, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." I looked at the dying fire, seeing faces in the coals. Sarah Crane, the mining camp woman. Mara at 16, scared and broken. Mara at 18, strong and free. "Some silences can't be undone," I said quietly, "but they can teach us, if we let them." Jesse stayed quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you think you're forgiven, Grandpa, for staying silent?" "By Mara? Yes, she told me as much." "What about by yourself?" That was the harder question. "I'm working on it," I said. "Telling you this story is part of that. Passing on the lesson, making sure the next generation knows better. Hoping that maybe, somewhere down the line, someone will speak up because they heard about an old ranch hand who didn't." I smiled, tired and sad. That's all any of us can do in the end. Try to be better, try to do better. And when we fail, try to make sure the failure teaches something useful. The fire was almost out now. Jesse stood, stretching stiff muscles. "I should get you to bed, Grandpa. It's late." "In a minute," I said. "Come here first." He came and sat beside my chair. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the strength in him, the youth, the possibility. "You asked me earlier who the mountain's daughter was," I said. "I told you her story. But there's one more thing you need to know." Jesse waited. "She wasn't just one girl. She was every girl who learned to speak up. Every woman who refused to accept abuse. Every person who chose truth over silence." I looked toward the window, toward the mountains invisible in the darkness. The mountain didn't make her strong. It just gave her a place where she could become who she really was, where she could strip away all the lies she'd been told and find the truth underneath. I squeezed Jesse's shoulder. We all have that mountain somewhere, that place where we have to face who we really are, where we decide if we're going to be people who speak up or people who look away. "Where's your mountain, Grandpa?" "Right here," I said. "Right now. Telling you this story before I die. Admitting what I did and didn't do, hoping it matters." Jesse nodded slowly. "It matters," he said quietly. "I'll remember, I promise." "Good. That's all I needed to hear." I died 6 weeks later. Pneumonia, the doctor said, my lungs finally giving out after 74 years of mountain air and guilt. But before I went, I made Jesse promise one more time to remember the story, to tell it when it mattered, to speak up when he saw wrong. He kept that promise. I know he did because years later, I heard stories about a young ranch hand who stood up for a woman being mistreated, who testified against a man twice his age, who chose courage over comfort. My grandson, living the lesson I'd learned too late. And somewhere in those mountains, maybe Mara heard those stories too. Maybe she smiled, knowing that the silence had been broken, that the truth had spread beyond one cabin, one girl, one moment. That change, real change, happens slowly. One person speaking up, then another, until silence is no longer the easy choice, until truth is louder than fear, until the next generation knows better than the last. They still talk about her in these parts, the mountain's daughter, the girl who was broken and became strong, who learned that worthless was just a word someone else used, not the truth. Some say her cabin still stands, up in the high country, that women still find their way there when they need to, that the mountain keeps her secret, protects those who need protecting. I don't know if that's true, don't know if it matters. What matters is the lesson, the story, the reminder that silence has a cost and speaking up has value, that we all have moments where we choose to see or look away, and that the choice we make echoes longer than we think. The mountains remember. The wind carries the stories, and somewhere always there's someone who needs to hear them, someone who needs to know that they're not worthless, that they deserve better, that speaking up, even when it's hard, even when it costs everything, is worth it. This is the story of the mountain's daughter, but it's also the story of everyone who stayed silent, and everyone who finally spoke. And everyone who will face that choice tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days that follow. May they choose better than I did. May they speak sooner. May they remember that some silences cost more than we can afford to pay. The fire goes out. The night grows cold. The mountains stand eternal. And the story, once told, lives on.